What's poppin'? YouTube, coming back with my second video. Today we are reiterating what we talked about a little bit yesterday, which is continuing on my Dynasty rankings for this upcoming year. Now, there were some surprises in our top 5, so if you haven't checked out that video, I would go back and look. I'm actually going to link it up here above. Check out those top 5 because then this top 6 through 10 will make a lot more sense. Starting off at number 6, let's get right into it. At number 6, I have Christian McCaffrey. Now, a lot of people are going to say, why do I have Christian McCaffrey at number 6? Well, I think it's a pretty easy decision when you think about it, especially for redraft right now. I think for redraft, you have Jonathan Taylor 101, and then you're probably going to be taking Christian McCaffrey as either the RB2 or RB3. But we're talking Dynasty here. He is 25 years old, turning 26, so you are worried a little bit about that longevity. And then, of course, you're worried about the injuries that have been happening the last 2 years where he's just getting those nicks and bruises. But I think that's one of the reasons why I have him as my RB6 and why I'm not as concerned as maybe some other Dynasty rankers are. Just based on the fact that if you have Christian McCaffrey on your roster and you're competing, that's just a cheat code. If we look back on some of his rankings, if we go back to 2019, he was the RB1 on a points per game basis, averaging 29.1 fantasy points per game, which is absolutely insane. In 2020, I know he only played 3 games, but he averaged 30 points per game. That's insane. And if we go to last year, even though he only played 7 games, he averaged 18.2 fantasy points per game. My thing is if he can get anywhere close to averaging, let's say he gets you, let's just do an average, averages 24 points per game. That is RB2 to RB1 upside on a week-to-week basis. And if you're competing, that's what you need. That's a cheat code on your fantasy rosters. And so that's why I have Christian McCaffrey as my RB6. I'm not too worried. I know he's been talking to Marshall Faulk this offseason, trying to figure out how to, maybe take a little bit less off that body, become a little bit less injury ridden, and just figure out how he can stay on the field a little bit longer. I think that's going to be key, especially as you look into the next 2 years. I don't think there's anything that scares me when most of his work is really that receiving upside that he has, and those are the type of running backs that I'm trying to roster, especially in those later years. My RB7, I have Travis Etienne. Now, Travis Etienne, why is he so high on my list? A lot of you are probably going to be disagreeing with this ranking as well, but I think for a few reasons why I have Travis Etienne. So, of course, came in with that high draft capital, that high pedigree coming from Clemson, playing with Trevor Lawrence, just being an all-around bag. I know he did stay until his senior year, so we will knock him for that. But if we look at his metrics that he came in, I'm viewing this on Player Profiler. He had a 4.5 40-yard dash, and he had a speed score of 104.9, as well as a burst score of 121. His best comparable was DeAndre Swift, which is exactly what we're chasing for when we want these running backs. We want these running backs that, of course, have that kind of LaShawn McCoy, the LaDainian Tomlinson, where, of course, they're amazing running backs when they're handed the ball, but more importantly, they're getting that receiving work out of the backfield. So when I think of Travis Etienne, especially this year, are already getting the reports out of camp that he is 100% recovered from this Liz Frank injury. Now, I am a little bit concerned about that Liz Frank injury. There hasn't been a ton of data that shows just amazing comebacks from Liz Frank injuries, but I do think Travis Etienne, we just saw what happened with Cam Akers. I know Cam Akers and his Achilles is a totally different injury, so I'm not even trying to compare that at all. I just think Travis Etienne, having this injury while he was a little bit younger, can bounce back a little bit faster, especially with modern medicine. And hearing that his reports out of camp that he is 100% healthy is something that, hey, all in on Travis Etienne. Now, let's think about what some of the coach speak is happening. I don't like to evaluate based on coach speak, but they've said, we're trying to use him like Debo. We really want to use him in the receiving game, which is absolutely awesome because we want him to get that receiving work. That's why we're drafting him. That's why I have him as my RB7. But at the same time, James Robinson is injured for this year. All signs are pointing to Travis Etienne being a full go as we go into 2022. My RB8 is going to be Saquon Barkley. Now, I know what a lot of you are thinking. Saquon Barkley, RB8 in Dynasty rankings. Are you crazy? I've seen other analysts have him as RB10, RB12. Why do you have him so high? I think the thing with Saquon is you're always chasing upside. That's what you want when you're playing Dynasty Fantasy Football. Now, yes, there are maybe some younger options that are a little less proven or maybe proven a little bit. But when I'm building these rosters, when I'm in these Dynasty drafts, if I'm competing, especially if your first 2 or 3 picks are competing and you can get Saquon in the 4th round, which is absolutely insane because I have him as my RB8, then you have to take that chance. I think when we look at Saquon, he's just had terrible injuries. If we go back to his rookie year, he averaged 18.8 fantasy points per game, which is absolutely insane as a rookie. Of course, second year plays, 2 games before he tears his ACL in Bear Stadium, which is absolutely terrible for Saquon. All the hype kind of died out. He tore his ACL. Last offseason started to pick up. The workout videos came out, and everyone was back on the Saquon train. Well, it took Saquon a few games. Took him about till week 4 before he was getting about 95% of the snaps at running back, which is what we wanted to see coming off that ACL. But then, of course, he got that little nick, sprained his ankle in the Cowboys game, put him out, and then from there on out, he was just pretty bad. It averages 11.4 fantasy points per game, which put him at RB27 on a points per game basis. That put him in the RB2 category. Now, you may be asking, why is that so high up? Why do I have Saquon? Why am I so high on Saquon? Why do I have as an RB1 heading into this year? So, Saquon Barkley, major upgrades to the offensive line. That was one of the biggest things. If you watched any Giants games last year, which I watched a lot because I have a lot of Saquon shares, so this may be a biased take, he was getting hit in the backfield almost instantly. Daniel Jones got injured. There was absolutely no receiving help. Every team was stacking the box knowing Saquon Barkley was the option. As we head into this year, of course, they got a new head coach in Brian Daboll, hoping that he can bring some of that Bills system, maybe light some light into Daniel Jones, because Daniel Jones has been really underperforming. But even if they can just have a basic, can we get 200 yards a game passing? I think Saquon Barkley, that opens it up for him. They didn't sign anybody of relevance. Pretty much their backup running backs go. So I think Saquon Barkley is going to be full go, 3 down workhorse running back. If he can get back to those receiving yards where he was getting 75 catches like he had in his first year, that instantly puts him in the top 5 for this year for redraft, but especially for Dynasty. If he crushes this year, it's just going to propel his value, keep it even higher than where it is currently. And so that's why I have him as my RB8. Got a lot of hope that Saquon Barkley becomes the old Saquon. And based on some of the stats, based on what the Giants are doing, I think it's reasonable to say that that's a fair price for him. My RB9 is going to be Joe Mixon. Now, I think there's a lot that could be said about Joe Mixon in his career, especially in the Dynasty community. He's kind of always had the hype, but always underdelivered. But last year was the first year that I can say that, nope, that did not happen. He averaged 18 points per game, which put him at RB5. Absolutely crushed it. Of course, was playing on the Bengals, which I love me some Bengals. I can remember the times going to the games when it was Carson Palmer, Chad Johnson, or Chad Ochocinco. Didn't really last, didn't have the flavor that maybe the Joey B, the Joe Mixons, the Jamar Chase, and T. Higgins are putting up, of course, taking us to the Super Bowl this last year. When I look at Joe Mixon and how he was used last year, he didn't really have the receiving work. Or he had 314 receiving yards and 16 total touchdowns, which is absolutely amazing. But I think there's room to even go up this year. They didn't re-sign C.J. Uzomah, which is going to leave a big opening in the middle. We don't know who necessarily. I don't think Hayden Hurst is going to be the answer at tight end. So you have, of course, Jamar Chase and T. Higgins getting theirs, but there's going to be a large portion of the receiving share that's going to be open to Joe Mixon. So even if he can increase and get like a 10% target share as well as with his carries, I think Joe Mixon is another smash to end up as a top 5 running back. And I think he has actually RB1 upside and sneaky for redraft. But if we're talking just for dynasty purposes, like this is the perfect buy now, compete now running back where you're not going to have to pay up maybe as much, let's say per like a Christian McCaffrey, but he's still going to get you in that ballpark. When we look at him right now, he is 25.9 years old, so he'll be 26 by the time the season starts, which gives Joe Mixon another 1 to 2 years. He's got that 3-year contract, so I expect Joe Mixon to fully smash again this year with the improved offensive line, Joey Burrow another year healthy, and you know what? Go Bengals. That's my pick. RB9, Joe Mixon. At RB10, I am finishing with J.K. Dobbins, which might be another homer pick. These might be back-to-back homer picks just because I am also an Ohio State fan. And if that just makes you leave the channel right now, like I totally understand. Put it in the comment. Tell me any team that you like besides Ohio State. That's totally fine too. But J.K. Dobbins is my RB10, I think for a few reasons. Reason number 1, he's playing in one of the most run-heavy offenses in the NFL. Between Lamar Jackson, of course, running the ball, and J.K. Dobbins, there's a lot of upside there. They're always going to run. Now, I know a lot of people are worried because they've been using a committee the past few years. So, of course, J.K. Dobbins comes in rookie year, was sharing the backfield, of course, with Mark Ingram and Gus Edwards. Still put up 11.2 fantasy points per game, which is pretty good. He had 18 receptions, too, which was quite impressive considering he was playing for the Ravens. And Lamar Jackson, instead of usually dumping the ball off, just decides to take it and run for 8 to 10 yards himself, which is totally fair, and absolutely love having Lamar Jackson on your fantasy team. He is a cheat code. But when we think and talk about J.K. Dobbins, he, of course, had that ACL injury looking back at last offseason. Heartbreaker, especially if you had him on your dynasty rosters and were planning to either compete or even if you were rebuilding. It just tanked J.K. Dobbins' value. I've slowly started to see it come up. So as we look at J.K. Dobbins, I would be putting him probably in the top 7, top 6 if it weren't for that injury. But I do think you're getting a slight discount when you're looking at a running back that is still pretty young. He is 23 years old. He has 2 more years left on his rookie contract, which is a huge deal. And when you consider the fact that he is playing in a system that now loses Marquise Brown, so you have Rashad Bateman, Mark Andrews take most of the receiving work, that opens the door for J.K. Dobbins to really just maybe get a few more receptions as well as really drive the ground game with Lamar Jackson. Now, I know they did re-sign Gus Edwards, as well as signed Mike Davis, which gives me a little bit of worry for redraft with J.K. Dobbins, but we do have to remember J.K. Dobbins is the most talented back in that backfield, and when they get a running back going, they like to feed that running back. So no worries for me for J.K. Dobbins for this year. Would imagine that he finishes as a top 12 to 15 running back, so he'll probably be an RB2 for you if you are drafting for redraft. But if we're talking plainly Dynasty, you're going to have 2 to 3 more years where I think he will eventually get to that RB6, RB7 territory. I think due to the receptions, he will never actually fully be able to hit that number just purely based on the lack of receptions. But I do think J.K. Dobbins, as that young asset, he is proven, and he will return to form after that ACL surgery. Thanks so much for stopping by to this video. Like I said, I'm releasing videos daily right now. So tomorrow we're going to be talking about my wide receivers 1 through 10 Dynasty rankings. So feel free to check that out tomorrow, and I'll catch you on the flip side.